So welcome to a new series. Today we're going to be talking about CSS and HTML development. We're going to be trying to learn HTML and CSS by creating some art. So in this lesson we're going to be designing the layout for our skeleton. So the first thing we should do is have a look at what we'll be creating in this video. So here is our skeleton with some fire in its mouth. All of this was done via using CSS and HTML. I think these kind of activities are a great way to get familiar with how CSS works and all the properties that you can use to create fun things. So let's get started. So let me introduce what we'll be doing in this video. The way I like to do it is step by step to try and really get you a good understanding of the process so you can use the knowledge that you've learned in many different areas. So in this video we're going to be just creating our layout for our skeleton art. By the end of the video you should have a very good understanding of the flex method and how to start planning out your CSS layout. Also, the way I try and do these videos is I try and make it as active as possible, so I don't just go through how to do it. I ask you questions and give you some hint in the way to answer it before I do it myself. So this allows us to compare and contrast your work with my work and hopefully allow you to get a better understanding of how to do it yourself. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is a cold task activity. So this is an activity that you try yourself before I give you any information. So let's see what you can do. The first activity is you must try and draw the layout of our skeleton. Everything must be in boxes. So that's how CSS work. We then use properties within CSS to change the shapes and things like that. So you need to think of everything in boxes. Then in the boxes you need to write down the kind of properties you want. So for example, the color of the property, the shape that you want, whether you need to have the flex property. So remember, the flex property means that we're going to be adding more than one thing into our box. So if we're adding multiple things into our box, we should be using our flex property. It's a way of organizing that information. If they have the flex option, do you want it to be organized in row or columns? And again, if they have that option, how do you want the content within the box to be aligned? And lastly, do we want to position anything manually in this? So the flex option automatically positions our content, but there is one thing that we might have to position manually, so have a think about that. So now that you know that this is just boxes, pause the video and see where do you think the boxes are in this layout. How do we make the skeleton, just the skeleton, with a box? Remember, don't worry about the circles and the triangles because they're still only boxes that we manipulate with CSS. So pause the video and see if you can create that layout. Okay, so hopefully you've paused the video and you've done the activity and you have your piece of paper in front of you. Let's compare and contrast our work. So you should have done the website container, the body container. The question you need to ask yourself about the flex property here is, are we going to contain more than one item in this? Now, this will not contain more than one item, so we don't need the flex property. The only thing that we'll add in there is another container that is going to contain all our skeleton information. So the only property we need to add is black. So then we create our skeleton container, and there we have a box. Now we need to think, in this skeleton container, how many boxes are we going to be adding? The answer should be 2. So we have the head, which is that round shape, the circle, and we have a mouth, which is another box. So because we're having 2, we need to add the display flex option. Then we should be thinking, where do we want to position it? So we want to position it in the middle. So we should be making sure that we have a flex property, and we want to make sure we've aligned it horizontally and vertically. Now that we know that we need to make two boxes. The first box is the head. We can add the skeleton head to it. So the properties of the skeleton head, so that round shape there in our skeleton, how many boxes are we going to be including into that? The answer should be 2. So we have the eyes and we have the nose. Now, how are they organized? So this is different from the others of the skeleton container. So we do not want them organized side by side. We want them organized in columns. So we need to make sure that the eyes are up here and the nose are down there. So we need to make sure that it has a flex display, and the columns, the way it's displayed is it's displayed in columns, not rows. Again, we need to make sure it's round and then white. Once we've done that, we need to make the skeleton neck. Now this is different from the others because, as you've seen, it's overlapped. So because it's overlapped, even though we're doing flex here, the flex tool isn't a great way of just automatically overlapping boxes. So even though we're using flex, we're going to also have to position it manually a little bit. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And because it's overlapping, we have to decide which one is going to be in front and which one is going to be in back. So because we've labeled this in front, we should label this in back. So we're already beginning to see the skeleton forming now. Okay, so let's have a think about our next boxes. So let's go into our skeleton head. So how many boxes do we need to create there? So we need to create a box for the eyes and a box from the nose. So we create these boxes. Now for the eyes, are we going to be adding more than one thing? Well, because we have 2 eyes, we're going to be adding two boxes. So we need to use the flex option. How do we want to align it? Well, we don't want to align it in the center. We want to create some space between the two. So what we'll need to do is we need to make sure that we've got flex space around. And what this will do is it will not align it in the middle, but it will create space between the two objects. How many boxes are we adding to the nose? Well, we're not adding any boxes to the nose. We're just going to make the shape for the nose. So the only thing that we need to do for the nose is make sure it's a triangle. So we're almost there now. The things that we need to create next are the eyes. So because we're going to duplicate, it's going to be the same information from both of them. We just need to actually make one CSS property, as it were, one CSS class called eyes, and then we can attach it. So all we need to do for the eyes is make sure it's round and black. And the last thing that we need to do is we need to add a mouth for our skeleton's neck. So again, how many boxes are going to be in there? It's only going to be 1. So because it's 1, do we need the flex? No. We can just add another box within it and label it black. So hopefully you're beginning to see how to lay out CSS. This is the most difficult thing. Everything else with CSS and HTML is very easy. You just need to get your head around how to lay it out, and then everything else is much easier. And this is why I'm spending so much time on laying out our artwork. Okay, so before we start creating the skeleton, I want to ask some concept checking questions to consolidate the main ideas from this video. So the first question, for the fire section in our artwork, how many boxes do you think we'll need to create? We will need to create the layout. So Try and do the same method that I did with the skeleton. Work from the back to the front and think, how many individual boxes do I need to create those shapes in the artwork? Where do you think we will need to add the code for our fire in our current design? So do you think we'll need to put it in the neck container? Do you think we need to put it in the head container? Think about where should we put the container. And then last one, this is the more difficult one. In the layout, you could make the same design by removing one container and then manually positioning the features in the CSS. So there are different ways of doing this. So go back to the layout and think, which container do you think you remove? And then if you remove that container, what extra code would you need to add? So you'll need to add another class, a completely new CSS class. What do you think that class will be? So stop the video, see if you can answer the questions, and then listen to my answers. So hopefully you've paused the video. So remember, we're trying to answer the questions related to the fire here. Okay, so let's go through the answers now. Okay, so don't worry if we don't get 100% complete, but if you've got enough of them, that's good because you're getting a better understanding of how to lay out CSS. So what we need to do is we need to create six different boxes. We need to create a box for the glow, the box from the animation, the box for the file, and then the orange, yellow, and white box. So let's have a look at how that would play when we look at the artwork itself. Okay, so we have a box for the blurred light here. So that will be one box, and because it's blurred, it's a completely different properties than the other one. Then we have another box that we will be using for the animation, so distort the animation. And then we have one box for the fire. So because if you look here, there's going to be similar properties in terms of the positioning. We're going to make one property that the one style for each of them. So we'll have orange fire, yellow fire, and white fire. So the reason why we're creating another box called fire is we want to make sure that each of the fire boxes has the same properties. And the best way to do that is to create a new style, a new CSS style class, and then attach it to each of the other boxes. Okay, so we will have one for the lights, one for the animation, one to link all the fires together, and then we'll have the orange fire box, the yellow fire box, and the white fire box. So if you've got an answer similar to that, well done. The second question, where do you think we'll need to add the code for our fire in our current design? Well, it's going to be contained in the mouth section. So all the extra code will be attached to that mouth section. Now, you could make the same design by removing one container and manually positioning the features in the CSS. So did you have a think about which container could you remove? If you've mentioned the eyes, so for example, you could remove the eyes from the layout, but then you would have to manually position the left eye and the right eye and then the nose. So because you are going to manually position this, you would have to create more CSS. So instead of saying an eye layout, an eye class, which would be identical for both, because you're manually positioning them, you would have to create a left eye class, which would manually position the left eye, and the right eye class, which would manually position the right eye. So again, the one that you could remove is the eye sections, but then you would have to create a new left eye class and a right eye class because you're manually positioning them. Again, there's no right way of doing this. Both ways are fine. It's which one you feel more comfortable. Okay, so that's all the time we have for the video. Hopefully you'll join me for creating the skeleton in the next video. If you found this useful at all, please subscribe. Do remember in the future videos we'll be looking at the CSS property for our art, so we're going to be looking at how to make the triangle for the nose, how to make the circle for the head, how to manually position the head and the neck. So not just using flex, but how to manually position it, how to make sure that we're using the correct flex properties to make sure that the information, the boxes within a container is aligned on the column, or whether it's aligned on the row. We're going to be creating the complete skeleton in HTML and CSS. Then we're going to be planning the layout for the fire, and then finally we'll finish it off with create the fire. However, you have your plan, and it's very easy for HTML and CSS to go and find out how to make a circle. So feel free to try and create the skeleton by yourself before viewing the next video. In fact, I would encourage it because it'll help you have a better understanding of this if you do it yourself first and then compare your work to my work. So see you next time, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.